Mobile Suit Gundam Cross Dimension 79. This was a fairly interesting Super Nintendo strategy game built on the Gundam license. It was brought to my attention that this game apparently hasn't been talked about all that much, and while I can't really afford much because I'm currently otherwise unemployed, go hit up the Patreon and Ko-fi to help support me, thanks. Love ya. I did see a copy of this for fairly cheap, and the fact that very few people have apparently talked about this game made me really want to. Because, well, not only is it a Gundam game, and I'm kind of a Gundam guy, and it's a video game, and I love all games, except for, you know, that one. The fact is, this was a game that really interested me, but beyond that, this game created not one but two brand new units to the Gundam universe, and one of them, the Ifrit, would later go on to become one of my favorite suits of all time. So, the fact that I hadn't talked about the introduction to one of my favorite suits of all time, you know, that bugged me. And this game had an English translation. This is an interesting strategy game that had some questionable design choices. This game gave me Dead Man Walking syndrome, and while I'm more than happy to accept that my bad choice led to an unwinnable situation, the information by which I was working on, I think, was logically sound. It was just some weird choices they made along the way that completely killed it. We'll get there when we get there. Now, the story to Cross Dimension 79 is definitely strange for what it is. See, if you work with a licensed product, you usually have one of two directions you can go in. You either make a game that is entirely based on the IP that everyone knows, and you hope that fans of it will just enjoy a video game equivalent, or you do something entirely original and hope people enjoy the fact that it's a brand new story and you don't have to go through Spider-Man's origin again. How many times do we need to see Uncle Ben die? Because more than one is excessive. This game, however, kind of does neither of those things, while at the same time also doing both, kinda? And it's entirely also a fan fiction. It's weird. So this game has 20 levels total. The first 15 are essentially the Cliff Notes version of the Mobile Suit Gundam film trilogy. You play as Amuro Ray, some kid from British Columbia who's now living in the space colonies because his scientist dad kinda sorta kidnapped him into it. He ends up hopping into a brand spanking new RX-782 Gundam mobile suit that Daddykins built in bright tricolor because we have to sell model kits to kids that are now pretty much exclusively premium Bandai products, which makes me angry to a degree I could not orate to you. Seriously, how many Pale Riders are there, and why are they all premium Bandai? He now has to go and fight the Principality of Zeon, a group of space people who really just want to self-govern and not be looked down upon by the people of Irath, who don't actually understand their experiences and plights, but their leaders are also a bunch of power-vying children who assassinated the actual person who actually had morals, and the whole thing's kind of a mess. It's also important to remember that, as I understand, this is based on the film trilogy that had to compress 43 episodes into 3 movies, and later had to compress them into 15 levels. So this is at best the Cliff Notes version of Mobile Suit Gundam. Entire arcs get scrapped, villains get removed entirely. Every single level is just focused on the struggles of Amuro and his rival Char Aznable, and a lot of information gets lost in the mix, and a lot of important character building gets thrown away as well. Rambaral gets all of one level dedicated to him. You know, the guy who had an entire arc for him in the show, and not just because he had a killer stash. He helped humanize the face of the Principality of Zeon for both the audience and Amuro, as well as muddying the waters and creating some complex, deep interpersonal connections with supporting character Sayla Mass. He has definitively proven that he was capable of capturing the White Base if he had received those DOMs when Makuve did all of his stupid shenanigans, because Makuve is a jerk. But yeah, no, Rambaral's completely unimportant. One episode, he's just some guy, don't worry about it. You did my boy dirty. I'm gonna be bitter about this. But we learn very quickly that Amuro is forced to endure the tortures of war, being a young child thrown into the front lines because he's the only person who can pilot the RX-782, slowly awakening to his new abilities as a new type, although that never actually goes anywhere and isn't implemented in any way in the combat at all, which is a little weird, and finally ending in a climactic showdown with his arch-rival Char, ignoring the fact that basically every level up to this point has also been that thing, so it's a little less impressive. But then something kind of weird happens? The ending happens, and then the game basically says, well, that was fun, but let's rewind about 5 months and then talk about a completely different, unrelated story. And then suddenly it gets into weird fan fiction territory. You play as Bork Cry. He's some guy stationed in the middle of the Gobi Desert, guarding basically nothing. His base doesn't exactly have a lot of equipment or materials. It has 2 gun cannons and a brand new shiny Gundam Pixie, which is basically the RX-782 with a big heart on its shoulder. Allegedly, it's great for melee combat. I didn't see that. But Fred Reber made pretty good use of it before he got the Ifrit Schneid. Oh yeah! And a bunch of Zeon soldiers are here to try and steal their materials they don't have with their big shiny Ifrit. And then it's just 5 episodes of sitting in the middle of the desert fighting the same enemies over and over, as far as I can tell. And it's weird, and this is about where I softlock, so I can't talk much more about it, but I can tell you that it ends on 2 different endings, one very, very good, one very, very bad, neither of which are considered canon at all, because there was a compilation game that included this story in it called Side Stories. I reviewed it years ago. It includes that story, goes by the good ending, but then goes and changes it to make a substantially worse ending. So, yeah, the story to this is straight up fan fiction. As long as you understand that they've now changed the ending, you can at least enjoy it for what it is. And that's kind of fun, provided you can get to it and you're not, stuck like I was. We're building to that. And I think they were really planning on going places with this Bork character. If you actually get the good ending, it ends on to be continued, except that there's no sequel to this game. Well, there is, but it's entirely based on Zeta Gundam. It doesn't continue Bork's story. The only continuation this story has is in the retcon that makes his ending bad. But basically the story is both a retelling, something new, and something completely off base. It's weird, but if you take it for what it is, it's alright. Now the gameplay to Cross Dimension 79 is very different. It is a turn-based isometric strategy game with RPG elements. And some combination of those things, as well as some decisions they made, are very, very questionable. The programming seems a little ropey at times. At one point in the middle of a cutscene, I got attacked, somehow dodged, somehow got experience from that dodge, which never happened anywhere else, and leveled up all at the same time. I don't understand, but that happened at one point. Before you go into any fight, you can outfit your team. Usually you have 3 suits, although sometimes it's substantially less. You have the RX-782 Gundam, the gun tank, and the gun cannon. You can modify their stats by going in and allocating stat points, and the neat thing is you can remove stat points from certain areas and add them to others. So your level and your affinities can be entirely fluid, sort of. As you level up, it seems to generally increase damage as well as health, so if you don't have those levels, that could be a problem. That might be foreshadowing. Either way, you have several stats you can dump into, including movement, which gets you around a map faster, so you get attacked less every turn, but you still spend health every single step you take, and this doesn't mitigate that, which I think is a change that could have been implemented. You can dump into your mobile suit's pockets so that they can hold more full heals and ammo packs for their ranged weapons. You can put your stats into close range combat, and skill. The first 2 fairly self-explanatory. Skill is a little bit more obtuse. You might notice that, oh hey, there's equipment at the bottom, but where's all the fun stuff? Where's the hyper hammer, the javelin? Where's the Zaku killer beam rifle? Where's my shield? Why does my Gundam not have a shield? Yeah, so skill. Skill is sort of this weird combination of both your ability to learn special attacks as well as your equipment. But the special attacks you can learn are also based on your other stats, so you have to raise both your skill stats as well as the pertinent other stats, like melee attack, to boost your ability to actually start learning skills. Interestingly, once you've actually learned the skills by using them X number of times to build up your mastery of them, you can use them as a hotkey, but that doesn't quite work because, again, questionable decisions. But the thing is, once you've mastered them, you can actually lower your skill and dump them into other things. But I also think skill boosts your ability to, do damage with your special attacks, so I'm not sure why you'd want to do that. The whole thing is kind of a mess, however, because sometimes your skills don't necessarily coincide with actually building your character up. Weirdly enough, at one point, I had boosted my stats so that if I point 1 more point into skill, I'd learn 1 extra ability, or I'd have the ability to use it and then master it so that I could just use it whenever, theoretically anyway. But then I raised another stat, and then my ability to learn that skill was just off the map, because I guess I was too good for that skill or something. It's a mess, and you just sort of have to fiddle around with your numbers until you see the ability you want. Now, because this game actually utilizes a continue system where you can continue infinite number of times and maintain your stats, this also means that you could boost your skill to the max level and just focus on the best attacks you possibly can, master them, and then dump them everywhere else and steamroll the game, which I did, and yeah, it's a weird stat. And by boosting certain stats, you change your equipment loadout and how you handle things, including for some reason equipping the RX-782 with Psychomu, which does not happen anywhere in Gundam canon to my understanding, and yet we're overlooking the fact that the Gundam is not getting magnetic coating to be improved, or the Alex, or the Pixie apparently, or the G3, or any of the 1,000,001 other Gundams that came between this and the Mark II, but then had to get completely written off because the Mark II was still the second Gundam ever created, canonically. Yep, we're just gonna give the RX-782 Psychomu a thing that it wouldn't have and wouldn't really be properly invented for a Gundam for, 15 years real time until Char's counterattack. But yeah, sure, 1 year war, the Gundam can do Psychomu nonsense, why not? Once you actually manage to kit out your Gundam, you are then thrown into the battlefield, and it is a turn-based strategy game. But it's a very weird choice for a turn-based strategy game. Turn-based strategy games usually run on one of two rule sets because it's a pretty well-established thing. Either you move your entire army one turn and then your opponents have a turn, rinse and repeat, or every single character has a speed stat and you just cycle through them until you have to repeat the order. This game does neither of those things and does something very, very stupid. Every single turn, you can move one of your units, and then your opponent moves one of theirs, and that's the game. Now you might be wondering why that's a problem. Well, the thing is, you have 3 units. If only one is functional at a time, on a functional level, you only really have one usable character. Like, full stop. And if you've only got one usable character, why wouldn't you funnel all of your resources, experience into building that character to be as survivable as possible? And you don't have a choice in this, because of course, Amuro sometimes has to be alone. He's the only mandatory character here, and if he ever dies, it's game over. All the other characters can survive or die, it doesn't matter. Amuro is the only character that actually constitutes whether you win or lose, and sometimes he's just entirely alone, so it doesn't make sense to invest in any other character when he's the only one that's mandatory, and indeed you only can use one character anyway. There's not really a reason to ever invest in anyone else because you have to build up the stats for specific units. This comes into play especially if you know Gundam lore and realize the gun tank don't last that long. So why would you invest in that? In fact, I did to test out a theory, and I wanted to see, because the game says that the suit levels, when Hayato ends up getting his gun tank replaced with the gun cannon, does that maintain its stats? And yes, it does, but it's not because the pilot's leveling. It actually decides to level the slot the pilot is in. This will be important later. So, basically, every single turn you can move one of your characters, you have to find the enemy and attack them. If you're attacking melee-wise, you have to face them directly to hit them, so if they're standing slightly to the left, slightly to the right, or any other direction relative to you around you, you can't hit them. All of the suits have different weapons and way of attacking. For example, the gun tank can't really do anything close range, and the gun cannon just has crappy Vulcans. The Gundam, however, has multiple weapons that can handle things at different ranges. You'll have to keep an eye on the ammo counter to the left side of the screen if you're going to use your long-range weapon, although you have Vulcans that are ostensibly ranged weapons, but you have to fight enemies at point-blank range to hit them, so good luck. Defeat enough enemies, and you gain yourself a level, which can then be used to resupply yourself mid-fight, which is very, very necessary later on in the game. Seriously, mid-fight levels to, like, boost all your healing items, you kinda need to survive off of, so actually leveling yourself more in this game is a bad idea at times. When you go and pick a fight with an enemy, you can then use a special ability which, provided your skill allows you to even use it, will, if entered properly and the game decides not to whiff your attack, you can input a Street Fighter combo to do a special ability. Use it enough, you've mastered it, you can use it whenever you want, in theory. However, in order to actually utilize these things, you have to approach the enemy, and moving takes your turn. So they have to be standing right in front of you, not actively engaged in combat with you, because once you engage in combat, it's just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, unless you want to disengage combat, which means they get a free attack on you, so you can use your special that doesn't do all that much more damage than your standard attack. It's a mess. If you want to use special abilities, you have to basically take a hit of damage or hope that enemies approach you at point blank range and do nothing, or otherwise you're just getting into a slap fight with them. That's all you can do, combat-wise, because you can't attack after moving. You're just moving. That's the entirety of your turn. If you end up facing them, you can start a slap fight with them, but that's the extent of it. Once you're in it, you're kind of committed to it unless you're taking extra damage. You can sit around and let them smack you to use your special ability, but it's not worth it, because now your mastery is entirely irrelevant because you have to enter that Street Fighter combo every single time. The only time you get to use it as a hotkey is the first move you get, provided that the enemy isn't attacking you and you didn't move and they're already within range. It's basically pointless to actually master skills outside of the fact that you can then use them if you lower your skills after that. It's just such a weird system to not allow you to move and then do something. Once you decide that, hey, I want to move, you are committed to that screen. And I don't just mean, oh, I don't want to move there, I want to take my turn back and go back. No, I don't mean that. You can't do that either. But I mean, once you click move, you're stuck in the movement screen and you can't do anything until you do it. It's the same as if you've selected a ranged attack. Once you say you're going to do it, you're kind of committed to it. And it's not just you that are committed to it, it's all of your resources too. If you shoot off a multi-combo shot, but you only need to shoot them once to kill them, every other subsequent shot has to be used and is wasted. If you start using a special ability like calling in a core fighter for a strafing run, and all the enemies just happen to be dead, but you didn't know what you just did and you wanted to experiment with the systems, well, you just wasted a strafing run. Drop it on yourself just to see something happen, I guess, but that's about it. It's a really weird system that doesn't really allow for experimentation or wiggle room at all. And if you're playing this in Japanese and you don't have a manual and you can't read Japanese, you're just gonna be fumbling around. And the game will not sit there and let you try and figure your stuff out, which is annoying. And going back a step, talking about multi-shot combos, yeah, those have to be animated whether or not they hit anything. So while you're firing randomly blindly most of the time, because you kind of just have to guess where the enemies are while you fight them, so it sort of becomes a game of Battleship at times, every single missed shot still has to be animated. Now that might not sound too bad when your RX-782 can only do a 2x2 firing shot. Okay, fine. What about Ramba Ral's Gala, which can fire 3 sets of missile salvos in 3 separate maps, and it's like 8 shots each time. Every single one of those has to be shown for some reason, even if no one's on those maps. Or the Big Zam, who has that hyper particle cannon, yeah, that has to show on all 9 screens it gets fired through. Even if it hits absolutely nothing, you have to see every single shot of it. It's a total waste of time. The levels themselves are structured on multiple maps, sort of compounded all around you. Around halfway through the game or so, it just gets taken to a stupid degree. Okay, so, you know how you've got multiple maps around you? You have to kind of go around all the maps to see everything. Well, every single level is more or less structured identically. The game doesn't really tell you what you need to do, but basically every single level is kill every enemy, or at the very least, kill the person in charge of the enemies. So Char, you don't know where they are. This might be a good use of new type abilities because you could like sense them and empathize with them and then go hunt them down, but no, you don't get that sort of ability. When you go through these maps, you're doing it entirely blind, and until you get close to the enemy and you're directly seeing them, you can't see them at all. You have a heat detector, which shows general vague movements around you, but that's it. You're kind of going in entirely blind. If you want to play this game at range, it is going to be absolutely miserable because you kind of need to know where the enemy is without ever being able to see them. So you've got 1 character that's designed for melee, 2 for ranged, and the ranged characters can't see anything. Why would you ever bother investing in them at all? Especially because you need to have Amuro because he goes off on his own all the time. So you're basically going to have the Gundam dive into these maps entirely blind, just trying to hunt things down directly. This works pretty much throughout the entire game, especially because the game is more than happy to take your side characters away at any time anyway, so why would you? And this is compounded by the fact that while every other character can die, if the Gundam goes down, it's game over. So yeah, why would you focus on anything other than the Gundam? So you're hunting around in these maps completely blind, and you just hope you find the target. And if it's Char, and it's pretty much always Char, he gets to take 2 turns every single turn, and he gets to attack and run away every single turn. So you get attacked twice, and then he runs off. That's annoying. You know what's even more annoying? When he blindly teleports away to a random point in the map. Welcome to stage 13, where you are in a 3x3 grid of maps. You have to hunt down your opponent. There's infinitely respawning everyone else that are targeting you directly, and you just have to go hunt Char down. Every time you take a swing at him, bear in mind, take a swing, not hit, he will teleport away. So you're running between maps entirely blind, looking for an opponent you can't see who can hit you twice, disappear before you have any idea where he is, and he'll teleport away if you even get an attempt at a hit on him. That sucks. You know what sucks even harder? Is after taking all the punishment from that map, you are then thrown into another map as a part 2, where you then have to fight the Elmith, along with 4 bits that can each move once and attack once, and each of their attacks is actually 4 attacks. So you're taking about something around the area of 240 damage a turn, provided the Elmith doesn't decide to take shots at you as well. And oh yeah, half the bits will take damage to physical attacks, half will take damage to melee attacks. You might want to know which one is which. There is no visual identifier. And this is a consistent problem with the enemies, is enemy stats fluctuate wildly. Characters in the exact same units will sometimes take 0 damage to melee and only damage to ranged, vice versa. Some will be like ridiculously good dodgers. Some will use combo attacks that can take you out instantly. It's just weird, the variation of enemies here that are just not explained to you, and you just can't tell. And that's not even the worst level, because the level before that, you're going up against the big Zom, and that is, whereas before this you were dealing with 2x2 sized maps, maybe a 2x3 map. Yeah, this is a 1x9 map. Get to the end of this map within 20 turns, or you die instantly. You have to stay out of the center of the map by turn 10, or you die instantly. You have to avoid the big Zom at all costs despite having to kill it, or you die instantly. If it decides that it needs to go into the background to do an explosion to attack melee units, and you get hit by it, you die instantly. If you decide to, be cheeky and get ready to hit it with a standard attack, and it decides to go into the foreground, it will knock you out of the way into its path, and you'll take severe damage, but at least you don't die instantly. But once you figure that all out, it follows a very basic pattern, and it's just sitting duck, really. It's such a weird map, and, it's so bizarre the way it's structured. The way these maps are made are confusing and awkward. Nothing is explained to you, even though it's relatively rudimentary. By the end, it gets to be sheer misery. And I guess I've stalled it enough. Let's talk about level 15. So level 15 is the non-canonical adventures of Bork, the guy stranded in the middle of the desert because no particular reason, guarding nothing. He's gonna get taken out by a bunch of Zeons who are piloting melee units, including the Ifrit. And hey, he's got a shiny new, apparently melee-designed custom Gundam that's supposed to go to the elite white base unit, Amuro Ray, but it's available, so why not? Nah, he's not allowed to use it. He has to use a gun cannon. A suit that's designed for mid to long range and belly flopping if you're Kai Shiden. This is a bit of a bloodbath, because you're fighting nothing but melee specialized units, and this is about to go very, very wrong for you. And this is where I got soft-locked. Going back about 15 minutes or so, I mentioned that I trained up the gun tank to see what would happen if good old Hayato would get that experience to the gun cannon, and he did. Well, here's where I learned that it wasn't tied to the character. See, Hero Man Guy Bork does not take up Hero Man Guy Amuro Ray's slot in the character select. He takes up Kai Shiden's, who, at the risk of pointing out the obvious, is not Hayato Kobayashi, which means the one level I gained Hayato didn't go to Bork, and Kai being level 1 went straight to him, which means good old Bork is in a level 1 ranged suit fighting melee attackers that can close in on him instantaneously and one-shot him. There's nothing I can do about this. I'm stuck. And the thing is, again, you can only move one unit at a time, so focusing on anything other than your most important and most versatile unit, the Gundam, that was the way to go. That's what the game taught me, because it's really the only way to interact with this, because if I focus on every other character, the Gundam's going to be weaker and die, and everyone else will be moderately stronger, but they're effectively useless. And I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure once Bork actually gets into the Pixie Gundam, he's gonna get into Amuro's slot, which gives him the 20 levels he had, and he'd be perfectly fine. And I just find it utterly baffling that the game expects you at this point to have defeated Char Aznable as Amuro Ray in slot 1, and bear in mind, it expected you to be about level 20 to do that, because you're doing it entirely on your own, because again, Amuro likes to be alone sometimes. He's moody like that, and yet, while having to fight on his own, he has to raised up a support character to be equally strong, which means if I wanted to actually do this sensibly and fight Char as Amuro, Kai also needed to have been level 20, so that Bork can actually fight Henry Boone in his Ifrit, in a fight he's already outmatched in. I got stuck here because there's nothing I can do short of restarting the entire game because there's no level select. And it's all because they decided not to, for whatever reason, start this new chunk of the game with all the characters level 0, which would have been far more sensible, because again, you can get through the game without leveling Kai at all. In fact, Kai isn't even used in like the last 2 levels, so you have to be above the final level, effectively, 2 levels before then to have it transfer. It's such a weird choice to have made. I don't know, I got stuck here and there's nothing I can do. I even decided, okay, well, I'll gain a little bit of experience from dodging attacks or attacking, you know, sort of like how I did in that one glitched cutscene, but I got 0 experience from that. Unless I kill something, which I'm doing 1 damage to, and dying instantly to, there is no way to actually gain experience to level. I was prepared to spend that amount of time just grinding dodges if I had to, in order to actually get to the ending, but you can't even do that. In spite of the fact that the game very early on taught me that you should be able to, it just doesn't work here. Or perhaps it only works in that one glitched cutscene, I don't know. And it's all because they decided, you know what, we're just gonna have all the stats carry over and expect every single character to be prepped for the end level, despite the fact that every character can't even be used in the last 2. It's such a weird choice. Like I said, the gameplay itself is a series of weird choices on top of one another, and honestly, I actually did enjoy it, at least up until this point, when I kinda got soft-locked because of the way the game is effectively built and how I had to work around it. I'm not saying I did the right thing, but I did the tactically sensible thing, given the game's systems, and they punished me for it. And now I'm just stuck here, guarding a patch of Gobi Desert, and effectively nothing, in a story that doesn't actually go anywhere because I know where this story goes and has been made non-canon anyway. So I'm a little bitter about the whole thing, I guess. But the gameplay itself is complicated and awkward and wonky, but it's kind of fun, if a little bit mindless and definitely repetitive and unclear. The overall presentation to Mobile Suit Gundam Cross Dimension 79 it's okay. I've seen substantially worse looking Super Nintendo Gundam games. I've seen substantially better looking Super Nintendo Gundam games. Heck, I've seen Super Nintendo Gundam games that are substantially better and worse at the same time. This one just sort of falls into the it's okay. There's some fun environmental destruction, but it's inconsistent. Sometimes there is some, sometimes there isn't. I feel like there's a severe lack of visual indication of anything in this game, though. Like, okay, ignoring the fact that you can't see half the stuff half the time, you can run into enemies that, because of their wild stat and ability fluctuations, you try and run up and punch, only to realize they'll do 1 damage to them, and you should have shot them, but even if you could have seen them, there's no indicator for it because they look like the next Zaku next to them who will die in 1 hit sometimes for some reason. There's just no indicator for what these enemies can do and what their abilities are, and it's problematic to say the least. I do appreciate that as you build up your skill level, your equipment loadout for your Gundam actually visually changes your suit, although they had to program all the animations to not have any of the equipment, so even if you have any equipped to you, it disappears in use. And while some of the cutscenes look absolutely great, others less so. Definitely a mixed bag at the best of times, and audio-wise, again, for the most part, it's not all that interesting. Pretty much all the music is entirely original, which is cool, and I will say that the theme for the assault on Abawaku, as well as the theme for fighting the Black Tri-Stars, is awesome, but everything else is pretty much entirely unremarkable. Overall, the presentation is okay, but not much better. Now, if you want a copy of Mobile Suit Gundam Cross Dimension 79, cheapest copy I see on eBay right now is about $14, which I did not pay anywhere near that much. This is not a fantastic game, and honestly, I think I paid like 7 or 8, and even then, it's just kind of okay. I'm not sure I could really completely recommend this game, and not just because of how much it jerked me around at the end, but it's a game that feels like it's being held together with chewing gum and hope more than anything. The programming feels a little bit ropey, a lot of the design decisions are just strange, and most of the game you're just flying around blind hoping to find the target you're looking for before you run out of fuel and die. This game is rough, and the back half of it is just frustrating more than anything, but it's okay. It's an interesting retelling of the events of Gundam, even if it does kind of a wonky version of it. But it's not a game I can openly recommend all that much, aside from the fact that it did add one of my favorite suits to the canon. By the same extension, it introduced the Ifrit Jaeger to the canon, which means that, oh god, Code Fairy exists, and I hate that game with a passion. Seriously, that might be the absolute worst thing I've ever had to talk about. So yeah, cynical gacha-fueled things in Premium Bandai are awful. Video games, when they're actually trying to be video games, are good when they're made with passion and aren't entirely wonky, but this one's okay. Not great. But I did manage to also snag another Gundam Super Famicom game in the form of the F91 game that's not actually an F91 game, but maybe we'll talk about that at another time.